The first thing I felt was his forearm cutting across my throat. The second thing I heard was jingle bells on a loop, and the third thing I saw was 20 shoppers staring like I was a TV mounted above the toy aisle. Yeah, that happened on Black Friday under a banner that literally said, "Peace on Earth," which is almost funny if you don't think too hard about it, because in those 8 seconds I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except feel my knees start to fold and wonder how many times this guy had done this before when nobody important was watching. And when he finally let go and I dropped to the floor coughing, he stood over me like I was the problem, like I'd forced him to do it, like he was going to walk away and file it under disturbance, resolved the same way you'd wipe up a spilled soda. And I probably would have just stood up and walked out like my cover demanded, except 5 shoppers dropped their bags at the same time, pulled badges out of pockets and purses like a magic trick. And one calm voice said, "Federal agent hands where I can see them." Another voice said, "FBI." And Officer Mason Klein, the man who just tried to choke me out in public, realized he'd picked the wrong target at the worst possible moment. My name is Lena Parker, I'm a federal agent, and before you picture some action movie version of this where I flip him on his back and save the day, let me tell you the truth. I didn't do anything heroic in that moment. I didn't fight him, I didn't yell, I didn't pull a badge, I didn't even want attention, because for 18 months I'd been living as a nobody on purpose, a tired woman with a cheap apartment, a part-time job, and a made-up life that was supposed to be invisible, you know what I mean? The whole point of undercover work is you don't get to be yourself, you don't get to correct people, you don't get to win arguments, you just absorb disrespect like it's weather because you're there for the bigger thing. And the bigger thing that day was Eddie Rourke, the local businessman who owned a car lot, a pawn shop, and half the commercial property in Brookstone, Iowa, the kind of guy who shakes hands at charity events and smiles for the camera and then quietly pushes fentanyl through the Midwest like it's a regular supply chain. We'd been watching Rourke for years, and for the last 18 months we'd been building a case that wasn't just about him, it was about the whole ecosystem around him. The cops he paid, the lawyers who cleaned things up, the officials who looked the other way. A RICO case, the same kind of statute used to take down mob families, because what we were dealing with wasn't random crime, it was organized, layered, protected. It started in a briefing room with bad coffee and fluorescent lights that make everybody look sick. My supervisor, Special Agent Grant Hale, slid a file across the table like he was handing me a menu, and he said, "Brookstone population 40-something thousand, 1 mall, 3 churches, a drug pipeline moving about 1.6 million a month through the Midwest, and the man at the center is Eddie Rourke." Then he slid another photo across. Officer Mason Klein, Brookstone PD, 8 years on the force, 11 complaints, 0 discipline, and in half our surveillance photos he's standing next to Rourke like they're cousins at a barbecue. Hale said Klein's dirty, but we think there are at least 5 officers on the payroll, maybe more, and we need names, proof patterns, money communications. We need the kind of case you can drop on a judge's desk that makes the room go quiet. I asked, "What's my cover?" Hale didn't even blink. "Retail worker, single mom, new to town, you're nobody." And that was the point, because in a small town, people notice the new teacher, they notice the new nurse, they notice anyone with confidence, but they do not notice the woman stocking shelves and keeping her head down. They see right through her. And for a long time that worked, because I didn't push, I didn't react, I didn't do anything that made me memorable. I just watched, listened, documented, and waited for the moment. Rourke slipped. Black Friday was supposed to be one of those moments, because we got a hit that Rourke was going to the Hawthorne Galleria. And in a town that size, when he goes somewhere in public, it's usually because he's meeting someone who matters. So we positioned agents all over the mall, not in tactical gear, not looking tough, just as normal shoppers, one by the entrance holding a bag from some store he'd never actually shop at, one leaning on a railing pretending to scroll through his phone, another sitting in the food court sipping a soda like it was the highlight of his day. We were invisible on purpose, and I was invisible too. No badge, no gun, no radio, nothing. Just jeans, sneakers, and a plain jacket. Because the second you look like law enforcement, Rourke becomes smoke. The mall itself was exactly what you'd expect. Packed and loud and desperate, the air smelling like cinnamon pretzels and artificial pine gold tinsel everywhere. Fake snow dusted on surfaces that never asked for it, and speakers playing the same 12 bars of Christmas music on repeat like the building was trying to hypnotize everyone into buying more stuff. I moved through the crowd and tracked Rourke from a distance, and when he passed the toy store, I needed a reason to linger, so I grabbed the most ridiculous thing I could find. A pink doll in a sparkly dress, something I would never buy in real life, but it put me near the front, where I could watch the flow of people and keep him in my peripheral. The shelf tag said $19,999, the register rang up $29.99, $10. Not life-changing, but a tag is a tag. And here's the thing that still gets me. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse anyone, I didn't demand special treatment, I just said politely, "Hey, I'm sorry." The shelf said 1999, can you double check? The cashier was a teenager with eyes like she'd been working since 2008. She barely looked up and said, "That's the price." I said, "Could you check the shelf?" She sighed and called the manager. He showed up in a cheap tie and a face that told me he'd decided I was a problem before I even spoke, and he looked at me like I was trying to steal something by reading the sign in front of my face. "Is there an issue?" he asked, and I said, "The shelf price and the register price don't match. I'd like you to check it." And he didn't move, he just stared, the kind of stare that says, "I know your type," which is a wild thing to project onto a stranger over a doll. I reached for my wallet because honestly I wasn't there to argue about $10, I was there to track Eddie Rourke. But the manager was already doing that subtle signal thing, and I saw him glance toward the store entrance like he was calling in backup. And then Officer Mason Klein walked in. He didn't look at the shelf, he didn't look at the register, he didn't ask what happened. He looked at me, and his hand went straight to his belt, not his radio, not a notepad, his cuffs. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he said flat and cold. I kept my hands visible, palms open the way they teach de-escalation, and I said, "Officer, there's just a price discrepancy. I'm trying to pay and go." He leaned in a little like he enjoyed being close enough to intimidate, and he said, "I don't care about the price, you're causing a disturbance." A disturbance. In a packed mall on Black Friday, a disturbance is basically just code for, "I don't like your tone," except my tone was calm. People started slowing down around us. Phones started coming out not to help, just to record. And I could feel that familiar tightness in my chest that comes when you realize you're being boxed into a narrative you didn't choose. Klein told me to step back, and I didn't move, not because I was resisting, but because he didn't tell me where to go, and that matters because vague commands are a trap. I said, "Where would you like me to step back to?" He didn't answer. He stepped closer. I could smell too much cologne over sweat, and his jaw tightened like he was working himself up. I glanced toward the glass display case and caught the reflection of one of my agents close enough to intervene, and he didn't move, and I understood why immediately. Because Rourke was near the food court about 30 feet away, and if 5 federal agents blew their cover to save me from embarrassment, we'd lose him, and 18 months of work would evaporate in a second. So I swallowed my pride, stayed small, stayed calm, stayed in character, and Klein grabbed my arm like he was grabbing luggage off a conveyor belt. Hard. His thumb dug into that pressure point above the elbow, and he said, "Let's go." I didn't pull away, I didn't swing, I didn't raise my voice, I just said quietly, but clearly, "You're hurting me." He twisted my arm behind my back, fast practiced, and I gasped, and the crowd leaned in like it was entertainment, and then he spun me and slid his forearm across my throat. That hold. Lateral vascular neck restraint, the kind departments ban because it's too easy to kill someone, too easy to claim it was training, too easy to hide behind policy. My vision tunneled. The fluorescent lights above smeared into halos. The sound of the mall faded into this high ringing, and all I could think was, he's not angry, he's not scared, he's certain. And certainty is the scariest thing on a person with authority. 8 seconds. 8 seconds while a Christmas song played and people stared. Then he let go, and I dropped to my knees, coughing, throat-burning eyes, watering my phone on the floor with a cracked screen. He keyed his radio like he'd just fixed a problem. "Dispatch incident resolved, no arrest necessary. Subject will be escorted out." And he stood there with his hand on his belt, waiting for me to move like a trained animal. I stood up slowly because I had to, because the job demanded it, because if I did anything that looked like I was law enforcement, Rourke would vanish, and I turned toward the exit like I was leaving. And that's when a voice cut through the air, calm and loud enough to freeze the crowd. "Federal agent, everyone stay where you are." Another voice, FBI officer, hands where I can see them. Then shopping bags hit the floor, badges flashed, and 5 agents formed a ring around Klein in the middle of the toy store. The crowd gasped and backed up, phones still recording, and Klein's hand twitched toward his gun, and my supervisor's voice came again, soft and deadly. "Don't." Klein froze. I turned back, stood up straight, wiped my mouth, and looked him dead in the face, and I said, "Officer Klein, I'm Special Agent Lena Parker, FBI. You're under arrest." In that moment, I watched his eyes do the math. Not about right and wrong, not about what he'd done to me, about consequences, because he suddenly realized the woman he thought he could humiliate was a federal witness with a federal team and a federal warrant. They cuffed him right there and walked him out past a sea of phones, and as satisfying as that sounds, I felt sick because I knew exactly what happened at the same time. Eddie Rourke saw those badges and vanished into the Black Friday chaos, and by the time agents reached the food court, he was gone. 18 months of work and the main target slipped away because one cop couldn't keep his hands to himself. That night, the clip went viral and the internet did what the internet does. Half the people were furious, half the people were looking for a reason to blame me. And Brookstone PD issued the coldest statement you've ever heard. Officer placed on administrative leave pending investigation like a chokehold is a paperwork issue. The union piled on with the same old language, complex circumstances, non-compliant, split-second decisions. And I sat in a hotel room with a bruised throat listening to strangers debate whether I deserved to breathe. You know what I mean? It's a special kind of anger because you realize the public doesn't need facts. They need a story that protects what they want to believe. Hale asked if I wanted to watch Klein's body cam. I said yes, because truth is the only thing that lasts. The footage showed me calm at the register, hands visible, voice steady, and it showed Klein approaching with his cold tone and his eager cuffs. But the most important part was before he ever touched me. He was on the phone. The body cam audio caught it. "Yeah, I see her," Klein said. "That woman asking questions, I'll handle it." A voice on the other end said, "Make it quick, we can't afford attention." Our analysts ran it against months of recorded surveillance calls. It came back as Eddie Rourke with a high-confidence match. That changed everything because now it wasn't just assault, it was conspiracy. It was a criminal ordering a cop to silence a person he believed was watching him, and that bruise on my throat turned into evidence in a federal case. Over the next week, we stacked receipts like bricks. Bank records showed steady cash deposits into Klein's account, $7, $200 on the same day every month, always at ATMs within a couple miles of Rourke's businesses. We pulled financials on other officers and found similar patterns, different amounts, same timing, same ATM clusters. We pulled complaint histories and found the same ugly truth. Years of excessive force complaints closed with no discipline, as if paper could erase bruises. We subpoenaed internal emails and found investigators recommending hearing suspensions, real consequences, and leadership responding with some version of the union will grieve, close it quietly. We pulled body cam logs and found malfunctions happening at the most convenient times over and over, like the cameras had learned fear. We interviewed people who'd filed complaints, and a pattern showed up that made my stomach turn. The people targeted weren't random. They were connected to Rourke's rivals, his territory, his interests, people who wouldn't cooperate, people who wouldn't sell, people who wouldn't stay quiet. And while we built all of that, Brookstone PD tried to protect the uniform. Chief Ray Donnelly went on camera with the flag behind him. Calm voice, careful words, asking for patience, praising Klein's service, calling it an incident, and refusing to say the simple truth that everyone could see. 2 hours later, a local blog ran a headline implying I had a troubled past. No details, no proof, just enough mud to make people argue. The union echoed it, partial clip, out of context, credibility concerns. And I'll tell you something that's uncomfortable but true. The first 48 hours aren't about truth, they're about narrative, and whoever controls the narrative buys time. That night I called my sister and I didn't sound like an agent. I sounded like a person because I was tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. I told her I did everything right and people still wanted to believe I must have deserved it. And she said people argue because admitting the truth scares them. It means the system can hurt someone who did nothing wrong. By day 8, Eddie Rourke panicked. He wired $500,000 offshore, booked a one-way ticket, then tried to arrange an escape through a detective in Kansas City we'd had on a wire. Jillian Park, a woman with 18 years on the job and a clean record until money got involved. She told him a cargo route, a depot, a time. She thought she was saving him. What she did was give us a map. Dawn raids hit like thunder. Teams moved at the same time, 6 locations coordinated fast. No drama, just doors opening and handcuffs clicking. Rourke's dealership had cash and ledgers and devices, the kind of evidence criminals swear doesn't exist. Klein was pulled out of bed, quiet, no swagger, no speeches, just blinking at the consequences he never thought would show up. One officer tried to run and got tackled 2 blocks away. Rourke walked into that depot wearing a cap and sunglasses like he was invisible, and Hale stepped out and said, "Eddie Rourke, FBI, you're under arrest." Rourke didn't run. He just stood there like a man finally realizing the room has no doors. The U.S. attorney held a press conference and announced a RICO case: bribery, money laundering, drug distribution officers using badges to protect criminals. And then came the line that made the room go quiet. Officer Mason Klein choked an undercover federal agent because he made assumptions based on her appearance, and in doing so, he exposed the entire network he was protecting. But the thing that sealed it, the thing Klein never expected, was technology. Brookstone PD had upgraded body cams months earlier, new vendor federal grant, and the system had an automatic safety feature. When an officer deactivates the camera, the last 60 seconds auto-upload to a secure server. Klein turned his camera off right before he approached me, thinking he erased the moment. He didn't. In that backup, you could hear Rourke say it clear, "You see that woman, handle it, rough her up if you have to." And you could hear Klein answer copy. That audio stacked new charges like weight conspiracy, obstruction, deprivation of rights under color of law. And suddenly the union that was so brave on day one quietly dropped him like a bad habit. His lawyer tried to throw the recording out. The judge said no department policy, automatic upload, legitimate evidence. The grand jury came back with indictments, multiple defendants, dozens of counts, Rourke facing life, officers facing decades, the detective facing prison, and Klein sitting in an orange jumpsuit while the charges were read. And for the first time he looked small, not because anyone beat him, but because the protection he counted on finally stopped. He asked one question, how much time, and the prosecutor told him enough to make you an old man in there. Here's the part that's going to light up the comments, though. Chief Donnelly resigned, and he didn't get charged. He blamed union rules, arbitration, bureaucracy, all the same excuses people use when they want you to believe corruption is just complicated, and the city announced reforms and oversight and new policies and an external review board, and maybe some of that helped, maybe it didn't. But the man who spent years closing complaints with a signature walked away without cuffs. Some people call that politics. Some people call it reality. I call it the part that never feels clean because real life doesn't wrap itself up with a bow. I'm back undercover now in a different city with a different name doing the same work, and my bruise faded and the internet moved on. But I kept one reminder from Brookstone, a still frame from the toy store camera, the shelf tag in the corner, and the Peace on Earth banner hanging above a chokehold, because it's the perfect snapshot of how power works when nobody challenges it. Pretty decorations on the surface, violence underneath, and a crowd trained to watch instead of act. So I'm asking you honestly, and I want you to answer like you mean it. If I hadn't been federal, if I'd been exactly who I was pretending to be, a tired woman with a low-wage job and no connections, do you think Mason Klein would have ever been stopped? Do you think Eddie Rourke's network would have ever been exposed? Or do you think the mall would have kept playing Christmas music while someone else got told they were non-compliant? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me what you think is right and what you think is real, and if you've ever witnessed something like this, if you've ever seen someone get targeted just for existing, share what happened. Because silence is how this stuff survives. And if you believe accountability should apply to everyone, not just the unlucky person who got caught on camera, hit like, subscribe, and send this to someone who still says there must be more to the story.